We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.
So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder what will it take for you to start opening your eyes? I wonder.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. It is it's 16:30, it's 4:30, it's 4:30 p.m. It's whatever time it is where you are, but that's what time it is here in Austin. And I don't even think that's the same time where Genevieve is. Please help me welcome. I'm Matt Dillahunty, hosting this show this week. Please help me welcome from That GD show, from Dave Warnock's Dying Out Loud. Genevieve, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Well, I've been better, been worse. Can't complain too much. I'm here to have fun and do a show and take calls. And you and I have done this before. Tell everybody a little bit about how you got involved with my other co-host Dave and what's going on with that.
Yeah, no, it's a really funny story. Once again, it is great to be here. Longtime watcher, first time participant. Back in, I want to say it was March of this year, I saw a video on Paulagia's YouTube channel. If you don't know who Paul is, he's got some great stuff. Anyway, he was highlighting some of his favorite atheist TikTokers and people who were sort of fighting against all of these Christian preachers that were sort of taking over the app. And he said, one of the best things you can do is jump on there and make your own content and get involved in the conversation. And so I did. And 2 weeks later, I was on the phone with Dave and he said he loved my stuff and would love to do a podcast together. And now here we are. It's been a journey.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I remember when Dave asked me, he's like, hey, could you, come on and hang out and do that GD show? And then we did a show, and immediately I was like, well, let's see about getting Genevieve on these other shows too, because I like the fact you come from a background that's different from me. Because if I'm not mistaken, you are a lifelong godless heathen of some variety or another.
100%. Yeah, I think I was maybe 4 years old when I decided, like, oh, it seems like all religions are things that man created to deal with the fact that we're bored and we've got a lot of questions and the world is scary and we'd like some answers. That was my story, and I've stuck to it this whole time.
Well, let's get in and take some calls. We've got calls lining up quicker than we're probably going to be able to get to them, and I like that. We have Manuel in Puerto Rico, pronouns are he, him, wanting to ask about what's the best way to learn critical thinking. Welcome, Manuel. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine. Oh my God, how are you guys doing?
Doing all right.
Good.
So what was your question, sir?
So, yes, my question is, how does a person that doesn't use critical thinking learn how to use critical thinking?
Yeah, I
don't
so
know if that question.
I don't think there's anybody who doesn't use critical thinking. It's just that some people aren't particularly good at it. Because we all are constantly in a position where we have to evaluate things. And so part of it is they're going to learn it from the people that they interact with, right? Like, if you say, oh, hey, I believe that the earth is flat. And we say, well, why is that? And you say, because I'm a critical thinker who's evaluated the evidence. Well, oh, I'm sorry. That's never the answer that comes up, honestly. But to say, okay, present your case. And it's like saying, not everybody understands what logical fallacies are. Not everybody understands the significance of them. Not everybody understands what a valid and sound syllogism would look like. And so I think, we need to start changing how we address this in schools to make sure that these are not only elective courses that people could take on logic and critical thinking and, skepticism, but perhaps some requirements. Well, let's go to Genevieve, because I'm pretty sure that she considers herself a critical thinker. Of, whether you started with a belief in God or not's irrelevant. How did you come about understanding the value of critical thinking and skepticism?
Well, I think I was really fortunate that it was something that was just instilled in me from a very young age. I grew up in science museums doing experiments and, listening to my parents complain about all of these idiots who are not critical thinkers. And I was like, oh, I better not be one of those. No, but I think to kind of touch on what you said at the beginning, Matt, which is that everybody knows how to critically think. They just don't do it well, or they don't do it all the time. I remember talking to an evangelical Christian friend of mine about the Book of Mormon. We were talking about Mormonism. And she had said, well, obviously that's not true. Joseph Smith clearly made this up, and he was a grifter, and he said that these were on these golden tablets, but where are those? That's convenient. And I bring up that story because when I would bring up issues with the Bible itself about, the Gospels being written anonymously and half of the Pauline epistles not being legitimately written by Paul, she refused to use critical thinking in that instance. And so if I were to answer your question on how do you at least get better at thinking critically, you need to examine your own beliefs that you hold dear. I think once you do that, then you are much more poised to use critical thinking in any aspect of your life.
What do you think, Manuel? You called in to basically ask what's the best way, and obviously we're not going to fix the world here today, because I can't dictate policy. I can't dictate what's taught in schools. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on this, Manuel?
Yes, the question came. I'm sorry. The question. I asked the question because I really, and I'm ashamed of saying this, but I really don't know what to think about religion, about the existing of God, and all those complex idea. I just say I don't know, and I feel like I'm not equipped with tools to know what is right and what is wrong. I feel like I've been taught to accept things just the way they are, and now I'm starting to learn things, and I don't know. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to chime in, Manuel, just to say that you have nothing to be embarrassed about. The fact that you're recognizing that you might be believing in things just because you were told to believe in them, like that in of itself is using critical thinking. So you're already way ahead of the game, and you should be very proud of that. It's okay that you don't have all the answers now. What you do now is you go and you read and you learn more. I think something that could maybe be really beneficial to you is go watch a bunch of debates by people who are atheists and people who believe in God. There are so many debates that are hours long by these amazing people, and just listen to both sides and think critically about each of them.
I think.
What do you say, Matt?
Well, I think what you're describing, Manuel, is that you were taught, like many of us were taught, to accept whatever pronouncements come down from on high. This is true because the teacher told you. This is true because the priest told you. This is true because your parents told you. This is true because a scientist told you. This is true because this book says so. And for each of those examples, we recognize your parents can be wrong, your priest can be wrong, a book can be wrong. I forget what my other examples were, but once you recognize that, we generally will rely on authority. And most of the time, it's probably a very good idea. If somebody says, hey, don't go around the corner, there's a fire there. Well, maybe there's not a fire there. Maybe they're robbing the bank on the other side. They're just trying to keep you away. But by and large, if somebody says, hey, there's a fire around the corner, they're probably trying to look out for you. And so what you need to do, and this is probably, I don't know, I don't want to make it out like I'm dictating what the basics of skepticism and critical thinking are, but you seem to have already got step one, which is I used to accept things because people told me. And now I've found out that those people can and frequently are wrong, and that alone is not a good enough reason. And so the next step, what some people end up doing is saying, oh, I'm not going to believe anything someone tells me. Well, that's a bad idea. What we should do is, you need to train your gut, well, your brain, but the gut reaction that your brain has to say, okay, somebody told me this. Is this thing that they're claiming, is it consistent with what I already know and understand about reality? And if not, then it falls into a category that makes it slightly more extraordinary than a claim that is completely mundane. And just keep asking yourself those questions and make sure that what you do is you say, I'm not convinced yet. And then maybe I'm kind of convinced, or I'm barely convinced, or I'm convinced, but maybe I realize there's a mistake here. And I mean, I'm just telling you what David Hume would say, which is the wise man proportions his confidence to the evidence. And so basically, if all you have to go on is somebody told me, well, you don't just dismiss it, because a lot of things are true just because someone told you. I mean, especially if they're about them and their identity and their thoughts. But you should say, okay, I'm going to accept this as a tentative fact, and I'm not going to put too much confidence in it. So I can say I kind of accept that this is true, and then be based on how much that belief impacts the rest of your life and the lives around you, do some investigative work to figure out whether or not there's more confidence justified. Does that make sense?
Yes. I also want to ask, when you were young, you struggled with the same problem as me, or not?
On occasion, I definitely struggled with problems similar to that. I don't know that identical. I mean, I'm sure that there were times. I'll tell you this. I was probably in my mid-20s when I started investigating my own religious beliefs a bit more. And one of the people who I went to was my uncle. And my uncle was a former medical missionary, a medical doctor. He'd done missionary work in Thailand, and he was the person in the family that probably was the best educated and understood the most about religion. And I went to him with a particular question that had been troubling me because I hadn't really spent much time looking into any of this stuff. And he gave me an answer. And I'm not going to go into the details, but the answer was really bad, but I didn't know it was really bad. And so I stood there, and my uncle said, oh, here's the question to ask. And being phrased as a question, it managed to convince me, because I had been trained essentially to accept without thinking critically what he was saying. He was someone who's older than me, more educated than me, had been involved in studying this stuff more than I had. And it turned out that he gave me an answer that was just absolutely awful, like as bad as Pascal's wager and that type of thing. But because I didn't have the confidence to say, is that true? Do I have good reason to believe that? Is that actually an explanation? Or is it the type of thing that people say so that you stop asking questions? Is it more like a parent saying, because I said so, than it is, when you say, why is the sky blue? Oh, it's blue because I said so. Well, that's clearly not true. I don't have any reason to think that your say so is what controls the refractive color that we see from the sky. But getting comfortable with saying, I don't know, is key. Getting comfortable with saying, I'm not convinced you know either, is critical too. Those two things together get you to where you can start asking the questions and finding better information. And for most things, if all you have is somebody told me, then probably at best you could just say, I can definitely believe somebody told me this and that somebody else believes it. Other than that, who knows?
Yes, I often feel ashamed when I say I don't know to people, because they think that I should know things, and I just don't know. And I sometimes feel ashamed about that.
Anybody who tries to make you feel shame for not knowing stuff should be absolutely embarrassed of themselves. And you are already, you acknowledging your ignorance is vastly superior and more useful than them proclaiming their lack of ignorance.
Yes. when you are on a debate, Matt, how do you keep your critical thinking when someone is being disrespectful to you or make you angry? How you do not let your emotions control your reasoning?
I wouldn't say that I do. I mean, sometimes I do. Some days I'm going to be better at it than other days. And on the days where I'm better at it, it's because I instantly realize that any sort of personal attack from them is irrelevant to the discussion. Any sort of dismissal that they try to do of me on a personal level. I mean, I did a debate with Michael Egnor, who basically just sat there and called me stupid the whole debate, as if that makes his case, and it didn't. And so I managed to keep my composure, except for when I basically barked at the moderator for not, for allowing him just to trample, walk all over me and not answer the question. Other times I don't. And sometimes I don't think it's a good thing to just sit back dispassionately and say, oh, well, now they're making fun of me, so clearly they have no argument. Because you have to recognize that some people watching it are going to feel that that's a win. And you got to be comfortable with the fact that there are people who are going to think that you're wrong, that you're stupid, that you've lost the debate, that you're unreasonable before it begins and after it's over, no matter what you've said. And so all I can try and do is do the best I can at any given time. And I don't always get it right. And you won't either.
So you have gained confidence in your way of thinking yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the more times you stand up and say, hey, I don't know what the answer is. How can we find out? And I'm not convinced that you know the answer is too. That's the one way to build confidence. Because if I say, I don't know, and you don't either, and you prove me wrong, now we've both learned. And now neither of us have to be wrong.
Awesome. That is really good. And I really admire the way that you guys express yourself, because often I learn to question things. And some ideas I do not know how to express them, and I want to ask if I'm not being. Anyway, I'd like to ask how do you express your thoughts, your ideas in a way that people understand? And yeah, that's my question.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you go and let you listen to the answer offline. I'm going to let Genevieve start to address this, but yeah, you're asking how do you get better at expressing ideas in a way that people understand it? That's an interesting question. Yeah. I don't know I know the answer to it, but I appreciate the call, Manuel, and we'll try and answer it offline. Thank you. So obviously you and I, Genevieve, we've both expressed ideas and we've been misunderstood at some point. What do you do to try to make sure that I've watched people who will always say, no, it's my fault. I must have explained it poorly, and try again. And I understand that you're trying to be the bigger person, and sometimes that works. But on some occasions, it's just that, no, I explained it as good as anybody's going to be able to explain it, and you just didn't get it. How do you try it? What do you do when you're sitting around trying to figure out a better way to explain something to someone?
Honestly, it's really tough sometimes. Sometimes it feels like you'll explain something that is so clear and so well constructed and blatantly obvious, and they're still not getting it. And that's when you need to take a step back and think about their perspective and sort of get into their mind and think about what is the hang up from their eyes, and like what is it exactly that they're missing there. And sometimes that answer is going to be like, oh, you're kind of just an idiot and you're not listening to me, and that's that. And sometimes you can't really avoid that. But I think, to sort of answer Manuel's question on like how do you get better at expressing yourself, I think writing is a really good exercise. Write down your thoughts where you can see them, like physically constructing sentences, thinking about exactly what you want to say before you want to say it. There's so many different exercises you can do to sort of get better at expressing yourself and making your own arguments. But that said, I'm not always the best at it either. I think everybody has those instances where they think they sound one way and they come off completely wrong. And that's just something that you learn from and move forward with.
Yeah, it's if there was an easy way to do it, I think if anything, we've proven as a species that there's not an easy way to do this, because I think if any of us had gotten together in, let's say, 2014 and tried to make predictions about what was going to happen from 2016 through 2020 and whether or not the prevalence of people advocating for a flat earth was going to increase or decrease, what type of view people would have on science and vaccines in a pandemic, who they would likely vote for, who's likely to wind up as president or whatever else, I think a good chunk of us would have been wrong on a great many of those things.
Yeah, no, if I had somebody from 2021 go back to me in 2014 and just let me know what would happen, I would think they were totally pulling my leg. Also, I mean, not just because time travel is impossible, but because it has been so insane. And that's just the nature of the world we live in now. It's funny how you learn to get by in a rational, crazy world, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And as a reminder, we've finished the first call of the show. We appreciate everybody tuning in. That was it was longer than we tend to do for the first call of the show, but I wanted to mention that for everybody who's tuned in and watching live, we appreciate it. The lines are filling up. If you have questions, if you have something that you believe that you think it's unrealistic, it's unreasonable, it's ridiculous that Genevieve and I aren't accepting it, then you can call in and tell us what you believe and why. And we may or may not agree with you. We may think it's one of the most ridiculous things we've ever heard, but without you calling in to say what you believe and why, I don't know how we can move forward on either getting better at the discussions or getting us closer to truth. But for those watching, you can sit there and contribute and talk. And there's a bunch of moderators in this, so huge thank you to the mods doing that. But you can also donate down below chat. There's a donate link. Every penny that's donated goes directly to the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit 501c3 organization. It does not, stop at Google or YouTube for longer than a second. They don't take a cut out of it. But in addition, there's also merchandise that you can get yourself if you want, like a coffee cup, a t-shirt, things like that. You can go to tiny.cc/merchaca to find all of the available Atheist Community of Austin merchandise. You can also become a member on YouTube, and that will get you out of slow mode. It'll get you special icons and other things that you can use to kind of liven up your chat. But you can also go to patreon.com/the Atheist Experience and find a way to support there as well. There are a number of ways that you can talk with other people, including some unofficial non-ACA sponsored chat groups on Facebook, including the Atheist Experience fan page. They'll have the URL right up there, FBAXP, tiny.cc/FBAXP. And then there's the Atheist Experience private fan group, which I'm amazed every day that they even let me tell you about it. But you can go in there and find out what's going on. There's also the ACA Discord. If you like having these types of discussions, if Manuel wanted to talk to somebody offline, or if you wanted to talk to somebody like Manuel, or talk to other atheists about how to get better at that, maybe engage in some practicing street epistemology or whatever else, there's the ACA Discord. And after the show's over, I believe Genevieve is going to be hanging out in there taking some questions as well. But if you have feedback or questions and you don't get through on the phone today, or you don't want to get through on the phone today, you can always email tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself, the co-host, the people behind the scenes, and you can let us know what's going on and what we should be paying attention to and what you think of the show or me, or we already hear a lot about what you think of me, and I'm okay with it. I have this is fairly easy here. So Setuf in Spain wants to know what's the difference between speciesism and racism or sexism. Is that right? Is that the question, Setuf?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for taking my call. Yes, just to explain further, I just want to know what is the difference between speciesism and racism, sexism, or any other form of irrational discrimination and prejudice.
Whoa. So first of all, you asked what's the difference between speciesism and racism and sexism. And I was going to point out that speciesism is a bias that's done at the species level, and racism is a bias that's done at the race level, and sexism is bias that's done at the gender level. You don't get to declare that they're irrational, because not every bias is irrational. I can have a bias towards truth, towards science, towards facts. I can have a personal bias that makes me like bald-headed people better than people with hair. That doesn't mean that it's irrational, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. So not everything that ends in an ism is necessarily bad, and not every bias is bad at all. But that's the answer to your question, is that speciesism is done at the level of the species. On that note, moving on, since we're going to get easy question right there off the bat. This one ties into Manuel's question, and I don't know, it'd be an interesting thing to kind of address. And that's Stephen in Washington, pronouns are he, him, wants to know how to determine reliable sources of truth. Reliable in what way, Stephen? Welcome to the show. Oh, I can't hear Stephen. I hear Stephen really quiet.
Hear me okay now?
Oh, yep, there you
There
go.
we go.
All right, perfect. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I called you guys a couple of weeks ago. I did some thinking, and I've decided to try on the atheism hat.
Oh, well,
see
congrats.
what it's like to walk around in some atheist shoes, and I found myself in kind of a conundrum. Usually, when I'm struggling with a question, I will do some research and present it to what I would consider to be the godly people around me. And that was kind of my go-to metric to measure whether or not to trust somebody. And now that I've seen that's kind of ill-founded, I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to balance people's incentives with where to find their ability to like convey information truthfully, right? So like if somebody has a monetary incentive to be dishonest, or maybe just they want to gain my trust and that would lead them to dishonesty, like how do I balance that with seeking truth, I guess? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think we'll probably have to tear this apart a little bit, because, you know, obviously you mentioned the notion of how am I going to tell the difference between somebody who's trying to con me intentionally? And I'm more worried with, I don't know about their intent as much as is what they're saying true. And so for me, I have a pretty simple definition of truth, and that I go with the notion that it's true if it comports with reality. And so that which is true agrees with all available evidence. And I don't, this is going to be really strange. Hopefully it doesn't send you running, screaming from the room. I'm not sure that truth is something that we have access to, and that it may be the case that all we ever have are continuing increasing approximations of truth. Because if it could be that you could say, well, a truth for something to be true, it has to be an exhaustive proposition, and such that because language muddies the waters, if I say it's raining outside, is that true? Well, what I mean is probably a lot more complicated than it's raining outside. What I mean is that right here in Austin, Texas, there is in fact liquid precipitation, at my place. And that doesn't mean that it's raining everywhere, because outside is a big place. Outside includes, I don't know, everything that's not inside. But at the end of the day, though, you're going to find people who are going to say things like, well, how do you know that your experience of the world is reliable? How do you know you can trust that? And when we get to that level, we're just basically sitting here saying, okay, we don't have a solution for the problem of hard solipsism. But when I'm looking at sources to find out whether or not I consider those sources reliable, for me, it's pretty much how consistently has that source been how consistently has that source represented things that I accepted and accepted for good reasons? And how consistently has that source offered corrections? It's the evidence that points to what is true, and I don't know how to frame the answer in any way other than that. I mean, what are you struggling
So
with the most,
my
Stephen?
My problem is that like I've approached this question throughout my life in one way consistently, and I'm trying to do it in a different way. So I don't have this exhaustive background of like, oh, these sources have always been reliable, because the sources that I would usually go to aren't reliable because they come to these conclusions based off of their faith, and my trust in them is also related to their faith. So like the main thing that I'm trying to sort out right now, which I feel like a lot of people probably are, is mainly concerned with medical decisions. I have ulcerative colitis, and the doctor that I go to here locally is a member of my church, and he's given me a certain course of medicine that I've pretty consistently valued as the right way of doing things. But now that I'm looking at alternatives, I'm kind of struggling with, well, maybe that wasn't, and maybe he's coming to these decisions for the wrong reasons too. Yeah, so that's my main concern.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's always wise to get a second opinion if you're not sure about a decision that your doctor is making. But it's also important to remember that even though he's a member of your church, he did, I assume, and I hope, go to medical school. I think that most people, even if they are church-going believers, I'm sure they can separate that to a degree from their profession when it's something like practicing medicine and prescribing medication to people. As far as finding reliable sources for medical information, I can understand why you would be wary, because there are a lot of crazy blogs out there that give really, really bad medical advice. I mean, look at where we are today, talking about the crazy world we live in. Just I would just reach out to another doctor. That is a great way to see if what you're feeling right now is worth pursuing as far as alternative goes.
So one thing about doctors and one thing about doctors in medicine, the fact that a doctor might also be religious and reach bad or incorrect conclusions in other areas doesn't mean they're a bad doctor. And it also doesn't mean that just because somebody's gone to medical school, they're a good doctor. And the same is true for anything else, which is one of the reasons why we tend to recommend getting second opinions on things. And I know most people don't, because we live in a world where I pay a fortune just to have healthcare coverage. And when, I've been running around to specialists and trying to get solutions, and I'm really at wit's end, waiting around to hear nothing weeks at a time. And I'd love to go get a second opinion, but that's not free and it's costly. And so the part of the goal is trying to get to a doctor that you trust. And you can do some online research, but we also have created a world where everybody can think that they can go become an expert on everything at the drop of a hat. Here, let me Google ulcerative colitis and see what's on the 53,000 medical web pages out there, and then challenge my doctor on everything. The fact of the matter is that you're not going to be able to become an expert on everything. And so what you can do is become reasonably informed, and to make sure that the confidence you place in someone is warranted by the evidence. So I'm not just going to trust a doctor just because they went to medical school and graduated. I'm going to trust them more than, the guy on the corner in the sandwich board screaming about the end is nigh, or the person who came into chat early to suggest that they were some deity who had cured my heart condition. getting a second opinion, especially on matters of health, if you are not convinced that your doctor is doing the right thing, that would seem to be the best thing to do.
Sure. And he has said in the past that that the current course of treatment that I'm on is like basically that God approves of what I'm doing. So that was kind of my immediate red flag of, well, maybe I should take a look at this. But yeah, so I'm glad that it's not just me. My big concern was that if I'm coming to these decisions with the perspective of godly people are truth-telling people, and that was my main thing. Like, that had been my approach to judging somebody's information as reliable for a long, long time, and not having that anymore just kind of immediately put me into a panic of, well, what do I value now? So
and that's a big deal.
I appreciate the different perspective. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I have family members who, once they're convinced that someone is a godly person, then whatever that person says is true. And because of that, because of thinking like that, my mom has sent me all sorts of remedies that she's heard on the 700 Club or whatever over the years, and most of them are pseudoscientific woo. And now the internet's great in that you can start to go look stuff up, but the other thing is that the internet is basically a lab coat for everybody. When you watch commercials, whenever they wanted to make you think, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend something, the actor there was in a lab coat as if they were a doctor, and so you take them more seriously. And that's the way the internet is. You can have an incredibly impressive looking internet presence. Like, I've got good lighting, I've got good green screen, I've got a really good camera and microphone here. Doesn't mean I know one fucking thing I'm talking about, but it can sure look like I do. And so we need to get people trained that just because something doesn't look like it was shot on a cell phone and put up on a GeoCities website from the early 90s or late 90s, that doesn't mean that it's bad. And I would also caution you, because I like the way you phrased it, that, people of God are going to be truth tellers. And I don't have any objection to the notion that most people who happen to be convinced of a God are honestly trying to tell you what they believe to be the truth. The difference is whether or not they believe it to be the truth is completely irrelevant to whether it is the truth. When my mom tells me that God is real, I don't think she's lying to me. I think she's honestly telling me what she believes to be true. I just don't agree with her conclusion. And that's something you're going to have to ease into a little, Stephen. And maybe you start with your doctor and the overlap there, but basically you're going to have to say, okay, I used to just accept, kind of like when we talked about with Manuel, I used to just accept that what these godly people were telling me are true. And now I need a little bit more. Maybe you don't need a mountain more. Maybe you don't need to go out and become an expert right off the bat, but just starting with, I need a little more. And you gradually hone your ability, you build your BS detector, and it gets better and better, just as long as you don't go all the way into cynicism and saying, oh, I'm not going to believe anything anybody says. The old adage about believe half of what you see and none of what you hear type thing.
Sure. And I feel a little bit better about this whole thing. I always appreciate you helping me calibrate my bullshit detector. Hopefully I'll have some more positive news to report going into this thing. I'm not out to anybody yet. You're actually the first person that I've told, oddly enough. But yeah, hopefully more of the things that I run up against throughout this whole change will be easily resolved. I know that they won't be, but I'm glad that there are people out there to help with this kind of thing. So just keep doing what you're doing.
I'd like to make one recommendation, Stephen, and you don't, please. If this is not you, then don't do it. I have one thing that I kind of regret a little bit, and that is I didn't take any notes. I didn't write anything down during my period of transitioning and how I got from A to B. Now, granted, I've been on the show for 17 years or whatever it is now. And I've got emails going back, as far as I can imagine. So I can put together a good history if I wanted to. But consider keeping something like a journal, even if it's emails just to yourself, of what you're thinking now and how you already recognize how it was different from before and what problems you're coming to. Because as you transition or continue to go along this route, or even if you wind up giving up and saying, nope, I was wrong and I'm going to go back to Jesus or whatever else, you'll then have a record that might be of use to someone else in conversation. It's the hardest thing that we have to deal with, is people thinking that they're the only ones who've gone through this. And while I went from being, an indoctrinated Southern Baptist to an atheist, Genevieve had a different experience, and you, Stephen, you'll have a different experience as well. And somebody can benefit from what you're going through.
Sure. I appreciate that. That's actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I've actually got a little note snippet in my phone right now, marking today as like day one. So I'll just keep up on recording those, and maybe some point down the road I'll have some interesting insights, being like, oh man, I thought this at the beginning and that was way off. So but yeah, I'll let you guys get on to other calls. I appreciate it. And hope I'll probably be calling again at some point soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. As a reminder, while we're not out of the woods, and I know that there's still pandemic and new versions or new variants and all that stuff, I'm going to be at a couple of conventions in the coming year, and I'm going to be there in person, including the American Atheist Convention, which is happening Easter weekend, and the Free Flow, that's FREEFLO.org convention happening in Florida in March. And I'm not going to, I don't want to be sitting here putting out advertisements, especially for things I do, but I wanted to remind people that as we get back to some sense of normalcy, especially people who are just finding their way out, there are events that you can go to and interact with people and talk to more than, just me and Genevieve and whoever you can get when you call in. There are those options, but I have a bunch more announcements to get through now that we're, 45 minutes into the show, because that's the way we like to do it. And that is that if you want to have discussions like that might lead to someone finding their way out of religion, you can go to the Atheist versus Theist debates group that we've been promoting there at tiny.cc/xpphilfg. And I know that you're watching the Atheist Experience today, and that there's thousands of you here, and we're grateful for that. And that earlier today there was an episode of Talk Heathen with J Mike and Objectively Dan, which had some great calls and conversation in there. But in between those shows, there was also the Nonprofits, the flagship show of the Atheist Experience Network, which I believe Genevieve's been on and will be on again. Mm-hmm. So how can you miss that? That's airing Sundays at 3 with brand new hosts and new segments. And if you missed any of these things, you can get all of our programs in audio format podcasts at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. That's your one-stop shop for all of them. And the reason that you can get those, and the reason that all of this stuff is happening at all, are because these people, the crew behind the scenes here, who were working to make sure that we had audio issues before the show. We had all kinds of little things. And oh, look, 3 of them have decided to just piss off right when I wanted to say hello to them. I mean, we just got like spinning. It's more important that you see us than it is to see those 3 people with the spinning little dots there. So all kinds of stuff goes on behind the scenes. And I don't want to forget that we also, in addition to the call screeners, we have moderators in chat, and we have people who are taking notes and doing timestamps so that we can get clips and remember what calls there were. If we'd have had a crew like this early on, maybe that show from 2006 that I can't find, and I'm just making this up right now, but maybe it would have survived. I don't remember. There are some lost and missing shows, and we're trying to avoid that at all costs. And if you don't want to wind up viewing everything as if it's a lost and missing show, oh, how did I miss that? How did I miss that? We do what we can to invite you to see what happened while you might not have been watching. Take a look.
You got to get the clothes off, so I'll start taking them off you, and that kind of cues her. Now she's like, oh, okay, so I'm gonna like transition smoothly into taking her clothes off, you know?
Joining me today is a special guest, Pico the cat. Pico has not been on camera in a long time, and that's because he likes to get on my equipment and get in the way.
He is working for Simon Cardona,
Yes.
and he's bringing the highest quality piglet producing products to market.
What do you mean you can? What do you mean you can read minds and raise the dead?
I can put my hands on people, pray on them, speak in tongues, and they come back.
Okay, well, I don't have a dead person to try this out on. I want to know.
You're gonna do the show with like an oxygen mask on?
Yeah.
And we're just gonna have to do it that way.
Dan, I am your father, Dan.
Oh God, no.
Dan has asked me to make it very clear that I am not, in fact, his father. It was one of the most disturbing things that evidently has ever happened to him. But, yep, that's what's going on. We have a bunch more calls lined up. One of them here, I'm going to see if I can't maybe get through this relatively quickly. Joe, pronouns they, them in Ohio, thinks I got Doyle's fallacy wrong. And since I think that I invented it, and if I didn't, then I co-invented it or independently invented it. I don't know how I could get it wrong, but there could be something wrong there. So welcome, Joe. What did I miss or what did I get wrong?
So, well, could you state the fallacy for me, please?
Oh, well, the quote from Doyle put into Sherlock Holmes' mouth is that once you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true. The fallacy is in thinking that you have access. It's technically true. The fallacy is in thinking that you have access to necessarily exclude all the things that are impossible. And I don't know how anybody could do that. That's the key, is that we are going to constantly fool ourselves into thinking, oh, well, we've eliminated all the other possibilities, so this must be the right one.
See, there's the problem. Well, not a problem. I'm coming in with a gentle, pedantic literary critique. The problem is the way you've stated it is I've eliminated all other possibilities, therefore whatever else should be remaining would be the truth. And that requires comprehensive knowledge, which you state, and truthfully so, that it can't happen. But I think the actual quote provides more of a reasonableness, because I can reasonably show in this circumstance that these things are impossible. And that's what Sherlock was about. He was taking in the environment. He was reading all the clues, and he was making an assessment. No. Okay, what?
No, I'm completely unimpressed by Sherlock Holmes. I'm unimpressed by any fictional character who's given access to information that the audience isn't given access to, who's written to be a sort of super thinker, when the person writing him is demonstrably not a super thinker. Not reasonable at all. His wife was a spiritist. He thought Houdini could dematerialize. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle bought into the Cottingley fairies and was convinced that because when Houdini escaped from his bonds and came out with the ropes and shackles still tied and locked, that this meant the only reasonable conclusion was that Houdini could dematerialize. This is why it's in my magic act while I'm escaping from things. And the notion that once you eliminate once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true, is true, but it's trivially true. The whole issue is, how do you know that you've eliminated all other possibilities? And that's where our mistakes lie. That's where Doyle's mistakes lie. Sorry, what?
Not all other impossibilities. That's not all other impossibilities.
All other possibilities. Once you have eliminated all other possibilities, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
Okay. You cut out very slightly. Okay, I grant you that, but on a more meta level, I like that Sherlock Holmes is the character and the super thinker character because it's a superhero comic for all intents and purposes for that era. Spider-Man is not real either, but with great responsibility comes great power comes great responsibility is a truth that we can hold on to. And I like the relaying the regulating all the impossible, and you can from a reasonable look about the situation. If this guy is found in the desert, it's reasonable to conclude that it's impossible for him to have drowned.
Oh, no. That's not reasonable to conclude. So you're going to call and tell me that I'm technically wrong on some pedantic point and then suggest that it's impossible for someone to drown. Then it's impossible for someone to drown in the desert when we know that's not true?
No. I said
you
it's
just said that.
To assume that it was, I apologize if I misspoke. I meant to say it was reasonably to assume that this is impossible during the circumstances.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. It is not reasonable to assume that something is impossible. Impossibility needs to be demonstrated. You don't get to assume it and then claim it's reasonable. Plus, we haven't given any of the details of the person who's actually out there in the desert. What if they have water in their lungs? Then the actual evidence suggests they did drown. And it's not impossible. This is the thing. This is the problem that I have with Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. It convinces people they're smart when they're not.
I disagree.
Well, one of us is smart. Sorry,
this is wrong.
That was for fun. That was for fun. But if you're going to claim that, the evidence suggests that something's impossible, that's not the way impossibility works. That's not the way reason works. Now, if you had said, if we have a dead body in the desert and that we're looking for potential causes, it would be reasonable to not start with drowning if we don't have the evidence for that.
Okay, you're right.
But that's different from saying it's reasonable to decide that's impossible. Anyway, I got to move on. I appreciate it. And I love the fact that you're thinking about this stuff because it's just me talking.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I don't know for sure if I was the first one to identify this as a fallacy. It's entirely possible somebody else did at some point. I don't know. I use it as part of my magic show because I talk about Houdini and I talk about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In particular, I like the fact that this was a troubling aspect for their friendship because they were friends. And yet Houdini is running around debunking essentially spiritualists, which Doyle's wife was. And so you got one of the greatest magicians who's ever lived exposing, hey, you guys are doing magic tricks. I know these magic tricks. Look, I can do that stuff all day too. And Doyle, I don't know if he was duped by his wife or if he genuinely believed her, but he believed in the Cottingley fairies. And I always also caution, we shouldn't laugh or make fun of somebody for believing the Cottingley fairies, because if you take a look at the picture, I wish we had the ability to pull up a picture of the Cottingley fairies here to show. And technically we do, we just didn't prepare for it. They look like exactly what they were, which is pictures of fairies that have been cut out of magazines and, set up on the flowers. And then the girls are behind there and they're taking pictures of it. I don't think it would fool anybody today because it doesn't even qualify as Photoshop. This was early enough in photography where people didn't know, oh, you could fake something like that.
Right.
Now we know. Now you're not going to be probably fooled by a picture of the Cottingley fairies. But
I just appreciate how passionate you are in your disdain for Doyle. It's really lovely.
Yeah, I don't like Doyle one bit. I'm not impressed with him as an author. I'm not impressed with him as a thinker. I do, however, I don't despise everything about Sherlock Holmes because I watched the ones with Benedict Cumberbatch, and I like his portrayal of Holmes. But I read a lot of mystery books growing up, those and Agatha Christie stuff, and Encyclopedia Brown's probably where I got my start. And if you've got young kids, that's a great start on critical thinking. Books like Encyclopedia Brown, sometimes the Hardy Boys, I think there's some problematic stuff in there. I haven't read it in 40 some odd years, 50, well, 40 some odd. We'll go with that. It's just, yeah, anyway, we have gotten far afield here because now I'm thinking, because I'm going to be doing a magic show after the American Atheist Convention. So now my brain is in the, let's sort out all the details and what's going to change. But
I cannot wait for that.
It should be fun. We have a bunch of questions. Let's see if we can get to some of them here. We have Alan in Michigan. If God isn't physical, can science even address the question of God? Is that right, Alan?
Yes, sir, Matt. That is. Thank you.
So science addresses that which is. It doesn't require that something necessarily be physical.
Okay.
But let's assume for a second that you're right, that we're limited in what we can explore to the physical world in one way or another.
Right. I'm just suggesting.
Yeah. Well, let's assume that that's the case, that science cannot explore the non-physical. That's not science's fault. And so now you're in a situation where evidently...
I mean, it's not science's fault. It just seems like the wrong tool.
Right, but the thing is...
The question of God.
Well, that's the thing. What tool do you use? And when you're deciding on the tool, don't you have to know something about what it is that you're looking for?
Yeah.
So what tool should we use instead of science? What tool, what methodology allows us to reasonably conclude facts about things that aren't physical?
Well, yeah. Well, okay. I mean, that's the root of the question. I mean, so it's not physical. So we just need some other method if we're going to address it. I guess I'm on to say it's a philosophical problem, and yes, we can never have absolute certainty with that. I mean, I understand the atheist position. I'm teetering there myself. I mean, we don't have sufficient evidence to claim X, so why should we claim X?
Okay, so let me clarify a couple things real quick. Let me clarify a couple things real quick. There is no the atheist position. People are atheists. Some of them are atheists for really bad reasons. I don't think you can be absolutely certain about anything, and definitely science is not about absolute certainty. Neither science nor knowledge is about absolute certainty. It's about reasonable confidence that's consistent with the evidence. And so to whatever extent you were describing atheism, I think you were describing skepticism, which is I'm not going to believe something until I have good reason to do it.
Okay.
So let's say, now there are plenty of things that aren't physical, like thoughts, abstractions. I mean, math isn't physical, and yet we can still reason about it. But math isn't something that exists like extant as a physical thing within the universe.
So, I'll just concede the bad wording.
Yeah, but well, I'm not worried about that so much as, for most part, take every God that someone has proposed. Is that God detectable as a manifestation in reality in principle? In other words, for every God that people have been proposing, well, all right, let's just pick a God. We'll go with the God of classical theism that exists within Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, etc. That being, can it be detected? Does it manifest in reality in some detectable way? And if the answer is no, then we're kind of stuck, right? Because if something doesn't detect, it doesn't manifest in a way that we can detect, we can't say anything about it. We can't say whether it exists. We can't talk about its features, nothing. And yet we live in a world where people are constantly talking about the features and qualities of these gods. And so that God must manifest in a detectable way. Otherwise, these people are claiming to have detected the undetectable. And that would make them incredibly irrational.
Right.
So we must be talking about a God that's detectable. So let me ask, I'm not asking you, obviously, but the question to them is, how did they detect a God?
Right. Okay, so when I have discussions about the origins of religion, and people say, and I was going to actually save this question for another call, that seems a segue in, People say, well, religion was created to control people. But, you know, there's, you know, you can look at one, you know, maybe you look at one religion and say, well, yes, it seems that that religion was created to do that. And you can certainly point to passage in the Bible that says, yes, about obey your masters or what. But the early histories, I mean, the early history of Buddhism, the early history of Christianity, it doesn't seem to bear that out. Now, it doesn't mean that Christianity didn't become a tool for that by the 4th century. I mean,
so the thing is, I don't buy into this notion that religions were created to control people. I think religions are the stories that we've told ourselves to keep from having to admit that we don't know, or to assuage our fears or whatever else. But the religions that survive the best are the ones that spread because they are also good at controlling people, because they give just enough detail to keep it fuzzy and meaningful to people, but not so much detail that you can debunk them. Basically, they're going to make unfalsifiable claims. I don't know where Genevieve is on this, but I want to get her in here.
Yeah, I mean, I would just put a hi, Alan. I would just put a different spin on the idea that religion was created to control people, because I know, you know, every time we say that, we're talking about a very, very negative, you know, oppressive structure. I would almost say that yes, religion was created to control people, but not necessarily in the way that you're thinking. I mean, in the last, you know, what is it? Humans have been around for 250, 300,000 years, and it was only really in the last 70,000 years that we went through this massive cognitive revolution where we started, you know, somehow in the last 70,000 years, we've just started creating these different societies and structures and eventually civilizations. And we have this whole new way of life that is very different than, you know, the humans that existed prior to 70,000 years ago. I think that religion was created to control people in the sense that religion gives us a shared mythology and a shared narrative that prevents us from othering each other and instead unites people as a society. And I think that was really the benefit of early religion. It was storytelling. It was just stories that you would tell one another and sort of explain, because like I said in the beginning, we're bored and we want answers. But I think that the proliferation of religion beyond that does have to do with just maintaining social structures. We kind of need those as humans. We're very social creatures, and religion was very beneficial for that. Doesn't mean any of it is true, of course not. But that's my idea.
I mean, when I'm talking to someone about Genesis, it's like, no, it's just a record of how they saw the world. You know, just don't get your panties all in a twist because, you know, it was 7,000 years ago. I mean, just stop. You know, that's not what the Bible is. That's not what the Old Testament is.
I was going to reach over and put on one of my Christian hats for a second because I like doing that. But I can tell you that when I was a Southern Baptist, my response to that would be, it wasn't 7,000 years ago. I have a real relationship with the risen God of the universe, who's the creator and governor and keeper of the universe and blah, 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 blah. And so if you tell somebody to forget about it because it's 7,000 years ago, no Christian or Jew is sitting around pining about Adam and Eve. This is, and they're not all going to take it literally. And so this is something that means something to people. That's undeniable. The question is, how do we go about figuring out whether or not it's true? And this is the thing that you began by talking about. It's like, you know, hey, if God isn't physical, how could we investigate it? What could science say? Well, I think there are plenty of tools that we have to investigate and explore things, whether they are physical or even in the sense of abstractions, because we have mathematics, which is probably one of the most rigid disciplines.
Yes,
far more rigid than what we understand about biology, for sure. You know, 2 + 2 is 4. Ever it was in base 10 or whatever. It's not the fault of science that if there is a God, it's undetectable. That is the fault of that God, and more so because let's imagine that there were non-physical spirits, and plenty of people think they are. I haven't seen any good evidence for them. I don't know how we demonstrate it scientifically, but if they can manifest in a detectable way, if EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, if that was a real thing, it's not, it's bullshit. But if it were a real thing, That might be a way to detect it. That might be, we get the manifestation. To date, we haven't been able to confirm any of that, but at least we can look. And what we're always looking for is that manifestation. It's worse if, in fact, they're trying to claim that there's a God, because they're claiming there's a God that can be undetectable if it wants to be, can be detectable as a matter of convenience for the people who are supposedly detecting it, created everything and created a world where reason and evidence and logic win the day. And that's how we go about figuring out the answers to the most important questions that we're going to come across. And then in the case of like Christianity, is then going to judge people based on their understanding of something that God failed to provide evidence in a reasonable way of finding it out. It's like you might as well be playing a massive game of guess what number God is thinking of, and if you get it right, you get to go to heaven, and if you get it wrong, you go to hell.
Well, yes. I mean, I agree with you. I'm not a Christian. I haven't been a Christian since.
Yeah, no. I
don't even
have to
being a
teach
Christian,
to more
even though
than
I
you.
grew up in a church.
Yeah. No, I didn't
that?
suspect that. I just have to teach to more than you. So I want to make sure that I'm clear with you, but also there's thousands of people out there watching
Yes,
this, and I don't want
understand.
them to be confused. On that note, I think we're going to move on to some other callers, Alan. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Oh, I just one more quick question.
Sure.
When were you in the Navy?
From 1987 to 1990.
Okay.
96,
anyway,
something like that.
Okay. 73 to 81. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah. I went in, I graduated high school in 87, went in right after and did about 8.5 years. But we have moved on. We got a bunch of callers to get to and not much time left. Michael in California wants to know, does free will exist? Well, I'm gonna not talk for a minute. So welcome, Michael.
Hey, Matt, pleasure to speak with you again. So I'm gonna, well, first of all, I would like to just say that I think language is gonna make a definitive answer somewhat vague, but so I do believe free will exists, and let's define it as the core abstract belief that people have the capacity to act freely, or I guess to put it more simply, just that a person could have chosen to do otherwise. So is that a good definition to start off with, or?
Well, I said I was going to stay quiet because I really want to find out what Genevieve has to say about this, but I will say that if you define it the way you did, then no, it's an awful definition, because what you defined it as was the belief that people have the capacity to act freely. And that definitely exists, but whether or not they have the capacity to act freely is the issue of whether or not there's free will, not whether or not people believe they have free will.
Okay, well, let's just start. We can just shave off that beginning part. Just say that free will is the capacity to act freely, or you could choose to do otherwise.
I don't know Genevieve's thoughts, so I want to get Genevieve's thoughts on. What's your thoughts on free will? Easy subject. Just dump it right out here real quick.
It's not like that's something that we haven't been arguing forever. And I still can never really decide exactly where I land on the free will argument. I think that a lot of the choices that we face every day might appear as choices, but they're really not. I don't necessarily know how much of my own decision making is a result of just my genetics or my thought patterns that have sort of been, embedded in me since the beginning of my life. I don't know exactly how much agency I necessarily have and how much of it has to do with external forces around me. I think we like to think that free will exists. I go back and forth on whether or not I really think it does. So much of what we do every day has nothing to do with us and our choices. Random things happen all of the time, and we're sort of forced to act on instinct sometimes. But
I absolutely agree with you. I think that some of our choices are made subconsciously. Some things we're constrained where we don't have choice. But I think that as free, I would call us free agents. I think that by necessity implies that we have free will. You can make the argument that, well, some things are determined, some things are random, it's one or the other, and free will doesn't exist, or other try to deductively argue for it. I think that the key point that I would make is the agency and the intentionality. To me, that's what free will is. We can talk about compatibilism. I believe in causal determinism in the natural world, but I think where the split, happens, and it's almost, for me, it's a split between naturalism and we'll say like metaphysical naturalism and metaphysical non-naturalism. It starts when you start talking about philosophy of mind, what is agency, and what are the reasons you make choices? Can you freely do it? But yeah, so I'll leave it at that. You can respond to those thoughts.
Yeah, so I will say that we have two other callers that are waiting that both want to discuss free will. I'm going to sum up my answer to yours really simply because I've done this for a long time and I've answered this question in a lot of different ways because my thoughts on this have changed over the years. I am still a largely Dennett style compatibilist in that I don't think there's a conflict between determinism and free will, provided we define free will in a very particular way. I don't think that we have free will in any extraordinary sense. I think in Dennett wrote a book called Elbow Room, The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. And one of the things he pointed out is that we have the freest will we could imagine. If somebody's arguing you don't have free will because you can't flap your wings and fly off the earth, that's not really talking about that. I had a discussion with Rationality Rules, and we sorted out some language stuff. What I will say is that I have a will, and you have a will, as far as I can tell, and Genevieve has a will. I don't know how free it is. I'm not remotely suggesting that it is decoupled from the past, but I can also not say that the past, that this causal chain is necessarily all that's involved. I don't know how much randomness exists in the universe. I don't know that any randomness exists in the universe. Maybe what we call randomness is generally patterns that we haven't been able to nail down. It's an interesting line of thought. But the example that I've used many times is, and I started this when Sam Harris and I were touring, because Dennett and I both think that Sam's a compatibilist. He just doesn't realize it. And the biggest difference with me and Dennett is that I don't think it matters. I think that Sam and I are pretty much in agreement on what we have. And that is, if Sam and I were sitting on stage and I said, look, you could go to the front of the stage and jump off, or I could throw you off the stage. One of those is an act of your will and your volition. And one of those is an act of me circumventing your will to impose my own. And that circumvention of will is what I think we're talking about when we say free will being violated. Because if I'm preventing you from doing what you wanted to do, or forcing you to do something that you didn't want to do, then I am imposing my will over yours. Doesn't matter. My apologies. It doesn't matter to me whether that's free will, whether it was free, whether it was decoupled from a past causal chain, whether it came up on a whim. I don't think that quantum indeterminacy has anything to do with that. I don't think you suddenly get free will by adding randomness. At the end of the day, though, my view...
I agree. And my point was that dichotomy fails. Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. But I guess maybe, and the real reason I called was because I wanted to get your insight, because I know you've been exposed to it so much and have thought about it probably more deeply than I have. But to me, it comes down to how you view philosophy of mind and agency. Now, I would agree that, everything that has come up to the point of even my conversation with you has been caused, it has, a form of causal determinism. But I guess my argument would be, in that causal chain, the mind, the free will agency of the mind is what creates free will. And I think to say, to use the word compatibilism is really just a language game in a sense. And granted, I know this comes back to a lot of people who want to adhere to a strict naturalism or, et cetera. But so how would you address it from philosophy of mind along those lines?
Well, for me, the philosophy of mind, all right, and I could just be wrong, but when I hear that, what we're talking about is the notion that there are other minds and being able to place yourself in the position of other minds to get a reflexive sort of assessment of, you know, oh, if I do this, this happens. If I were that person and I did this, this is what would happen. The ability to move from the intentional stance into like or in and out of an observational stance. Dennett talked about this with the, and I'm going to get this partially wrong, but the Cartesian theater of the mind. All I can say is having zero expertise in any of it, I've spent a lot of time thinking about will and free will. And what I said is probably all that I have to say on it. And that is that I have a will, you have a will. I think that what we're generally talking about when we talk about violations of free will is one person imposing their will on another, because I never hear anybody say that their free will was violated by the rain. Their free will wasn't violated by, you know, the weather or anything like that.
Not to interrupt, but I could argue that, you know, like the approaching hurricane is going to violate my ability to make free choices as to my actions. But
I agree it does. But my point is, in the entire history, no. And my point is, in the entire history of discussions about free will, have you ever heard anybody say their free will was violated by a hurricane? We don't think about things in that term. It's always about the interpersonal.
Right.
Now, I could be wrong. Maybe somebody does think that way, but that's how I think about it.
The reason I brought that up was just because you're comparing two agents and the ability of one agent to impinge on the free will action of another agent, which, you know,
yes, because that's what I think is all that matters. I think that the interaction between thinking agents is everything that we talk about when we're talking about free will.
Right, I agree. But I mean, why do we want to like come up with this term compatibilism? I pulled up the numbers on the Phil survey polls, and it's 47.2 believe in free will, 59.1 compatibilism, 13.7 libertarian, and then no free will like 12.2, other 14.9. But so I think
I don't care.
Yeah. Well, but
I don't. But I'm just saying, I don't care.
Well, why do we want to use the word compatibilism when it's really free will then?
Compatibilism is not, okay, compatibilism is a response to the claim that free will and determinism are in conflict. Compatibilism say that free will and determinism are not in conflict. That's why we use the label. Compatibilism isn't free will.
Right. No, but
compatibilism is a specific response to the claim that free will and determinism are in conflict. And compatibilism says, no, they're not. That's why we use that label.
But it's not, you know, it's causal determinism. It's not just determinant, but causal determinism. Yeah, I know. This is we could talk about this or debate it for hours. I just wanted to get your insights on it. And,
actually, we couldn't, because I'm going to go on to two other callers who want to talk about free will and determinism.
Yeah. No, I think if you really start like thinking deeply about philosophy of mind and agency, I think, well, at least for me, I've come to the conclusion that free will is true, and compatibilism is just a word that's trying to combine, you know, two broader paradigms of analyzation.
Okay. I love the fact that you called to get my thoughts, saying that I'd clearly spent more time thinking deeply about this. And then when you disagree, you suggest that if I just studied philosophy of mind more, I would agree with you. Okay. Maybe I will, but I got to move on. Are you ready for more free will and determinism?
You know, whether or not I'm ready, I guess I gotta be.
I guess so. Because we have Simo in Canada, pronouns are he, him, who wants to talk about determinism and free will, unless what we just said already addressed Simo's point. How you doing?
Hi, Matt. I'm good. What about you? Hi, Genevieve.
Hi.
I'm all right. Did what we say address your point in some way?
I just want to make sure that I understood what you're saying. So basically, you hold the position of compatibilists and not hardcore determinists, basically, or?
No. So compatibilism is the notion that determinism and free will are not in conflict. And I accept that with that particular definition of free will. Under a normative definition of free will, I don't claim that we have it. I just claim that I have will. I have no idea how free it is or isn't.
Makes sense. Okay, so I think I hold the same position because I don't believe that I'm not determinist, but I don't believe that I have like 100% pure free will. Why? Because that contradicts like the fact, because as a being, I am dependent on many other things that are eventually controlled by God, right? That's what theists believe.
I'm not dependent. I'm not dependent on anything that anyone has ever demonstrated is controlled by a God.
I'm just talking from a theist perspective, not talking from your perspective.
Well, I don't. So the thing is, I care about why you have the theistic perspective, not that you do. Of course, you can say that, hey, you could claim we have free will because God gave us free will, or you could claim that we don't have free will because of the nature of God prohibits free will. I don't give a shit. I care about whether or not there's actually a God, and to a little bit, I guess, a little bit whether or not there's free will, but mostly I don't care about that either. I want to know if you've got a belief about something, whether or not it's true.
No problem. So why do you consider yourself compatibilist and not hardcore determinist? Like, why there's this notion of will in your?
Why do you keep phrasing it as? Why do you keep phrasing it as compatibilist or hardcore determinist? Determinism is true. Whether it's soft determinism or hard determinism, we don't know. But both of them are potentially in conflict with some models of free will. There are other models of free will, one that Dennett puts forth, which I'm not convinced is in conflict with determinism. But I don't care about that.
No, because from atheist perspective, like, you cannot really say.
No, Simo. Simo, there is no such thing as atheist's perspective. We don't agree.
Okay, so I think it would be easier to discuss this probably in examples. For example, when you wake up in the morning and you want to choose between, like, you have blue pants, red pants, you want to choose between both. Like, are you determined? Like, once you pick up one, were you determined to pick one, or it was you who actually chose which one you could pick?
I don't know. I don't think the answer is known or knowable. Well, I won't say that it's for sure unknowable. I don't know, and I don't know of any way that anybody could say that they do know.
Okay, so
and I don't care, and I genuinely don't care. When I get up in the morning, first of all, I'm probably not putting pants on at all.
Let me ask
to the extent that I'm going to put on pants, to ask why I picked those pants instead of another. Does it make any difference? If we reround the universe and played it again, do I think that that's what's going to happen? Yes, I'm convinced of determinism.
Yeah, because the reason why I'm asking this question is because, well, yeah, this example doesn't really make a difference in your life. But if we take it on another scale, like, for example, saying when somebody kills somebody else intentionally versus somebody else who just killed somebody accidentally, like, why the first one would be judged for 25 years and the other one would be judged for 6 months?
Because there's a difference between an intent and accident. There's a reason why when you look at something like the Bible and ancient codexes about laws and morality, they say something simple like thou shalt not kill. But when you look at what the law, like in the United States, has to say about what happens when one person kills another, we recognize that there are a lot of different circumstances there. And some of those, that's why you have murder 1, murder 2, murder 3, involuntary manslaughter, reckless endangerment, negligent homicide, etc. All of these different things, because we realize that all of these are different. But it doesn't matter if the person, let's say there's a person who walked into a place, absolutely hated and despised the person in the room with them, and intentionally shot them in the head. That can all be true, irrespective of whether they have free will or will. It doesn't matter, because if there is no free will, that still happens as a result of determinism. And if there is free will, it still happens as a result of free will. And the difference between someone who walks in and intentionally does that versus someone who accidentally backs their car over someone is night and day and has nothing at all to do with free will. They are still the agent who is responsible for that death. And we assess the consequences of that action and attribute a penalty based on the risks of recidivism, of it happening again, how much of a danger are they to the rest of society, what's the broader impact. Those are the factors. At no point is free will a consideration in the evaluation of this.
That totally makes sense. But the thing is, like, in an atheistic society, I would say, or even determinism. Let's forget about atheism or theism or whatever. Let's just use the words determinism, basically. Like from a deterministic perspective, well, this person was determined to make such an action, so they're not really responsible for it. Like you cannot.
No. That's what I'm saying, Simo. They're still responsible. If my car was defective,
that's meaningless.
No, listen to me. If my car was defective and it caught fire while I was running down the road, it would be correct of me to hold the car responsible and to go get it fixed. It doesn't matter whether somebody had free will to hate someone and kill them, or if they accidentally killed them, they are the agent who's responsible. Free will is irrelevant. They are the agent responsible. And if it's a matter of necessity that we hold that agent responsible, if we get to a point where we can find out that that person killed because of a tumor in their head, if we get to the point where we can identify that removing that tumor makes that person no longer a risk to do that again, then haven't we solved the problem?
Well, I get your point, but the thing is, from a deterministic perspective again, and if you say like the brain is just made a bunch of...
It doesn't matter. Determinism is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you rewind the universe. No, Simo, stop. It doesn't matter if you rewind the universe and play it again forward. The person who killed the other person still did it. It doesn't matter if it was predetermined. That is the agent that is going to be held responsible. What else do you want to do?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm just going to move to another topic if you don't mind. So, because
no, you're not going to move to another topic. We got 4 minutes left in the show, and there's 3 other callers waiting. So you can ask this question, but we're done.
Okay, so on which basic or on which foundation you're making this judgment from a deterministic perspective, saying that this person is responsible and they've chosen or whatever they didn't choose, they were deterministic. Like on which foundation you can say that this person is responsible for killing, like for example, Hitler killed.
I just explained it to you. Like whatever agent, what the agent. No, stop. The agent that took the act is the agent that took the act. Is that not true? Did some other agent take the act?
Yeah, they're determined to do it. So you're
doesn't matter. I don't give a fuck. Simo, listen. I don't give a fuck if they were predetermined to do it. They're still the one who did it, right?
You don't really answer my question, Matt. I'm sorry. Like on
Simo, you're not listening and you're not answering my question. I just asked you for the 3rd time. They are still the person who killed the other person, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a person in this fictional scenario that was predetermined to kill another person. What are you going to do about it? You are now in charge, and this person, let's say me, let's say you are in charge and I intentionally killed somebody else. Does it matter at all whether it was an issue of free will? What are you going to do?
Well, again, from a deterministic perspective.
No, Simo, you're done.
Yes, again.
No, you're done. You're not going to lecture me about from a deterministic perspective. I asked what you would do in that scenario, and you are unwilling to consider this because it goes against what you want. If one person kills another, it doesn't matter whether they did it because of a tumor, because the universe predetermined it, or because of free will. That person still killed another person, and the rest of us around here are going to have to make a decision about what to do about that. And right now, given the current resolution, the current scope of what we can determine about human interaction, we hold people responsible at the agent level. Maybe in the future that will change to hold them responsible at the tumor level or at the brain misfunction level or at the chemical adjustment level. But right now it's at the person level, and it doesn't make a difference whether they hated them, whether it was an act of free will, or whether the universe decided this a long time ago in a causal chain that began with the Big Bang. That is still the person responsible, and we have no other option but to hold them responsible. That's the way it works. That's what justice is. Because of that, sorry. Corbin, you're gonna have to call back another week. I'm not doing another one on free will, quantum and physics. I don't even know how to get started on that. I'm gonna take Aaron as our last call for the day. Aaron in Arkansas, you're on with Genevieve and Matt.
Hey guys, good to talk to you.
How are you?
I'm doing well today. Yeah. I am an atheist. I came out probably earlier this year, I think, maybe late last year. Family, all religious, mom's a pastor. Anyway, setting boundaries with my family. I have a wife and a kid, and we don't attend church anymore. Obviously, I'm a great disappointment to my family. All the usual stuff. Yeah. I love my family, right? And they're very involved in church, and sometimes they put on plays or whatnot, or put work into it, and they want us to attend, but I really don't want my kid even in that environment, period, right? So I just don't know how to set respectful boundaries that keep people happy. Because again, I do want them to know that I care about them. And
I think you say exactly that. At the end of the day, other people's feelings are not your responsibility. And I think that it's perfectly fine for you to tell your family, look, Mom, Dad, I love you very much and I always will, but I am a parent myself and I need to think about what I want for my child. And so I will not be attending this even though it hurts your feelings. I do not care. I love you. I wish you felt differently, but I'm going to do what is best for me. And I hope you respect that. And there you go.
Yeah, I guess that puts it pretty.
Yeah, it's hard. I understand why you're calling and asking this, because I just made it sound very simple, but it's absolutely not, because it is really hard. Especially since it sounds like this is pretty new for your family. I don't think it's difficult to find the right words. I think it's difficult to find the courage to say them.
Yeah, I think that right there is giving me stuff to think about. And yeah, so I think that helps.
It's incredibly difficult. And one of the things to remember is that in most families, maybe not all, and yours may differ, if you get together for the holidays, most people don't want it to turn into a poo-flinging contest about who's right or who thinks what about God or who wronged who. Granted, I've seen some of that at some gatherings, but at the end of the day, in the same way that they wouldn't want you to come in and dictate how they're going to raise their children, or, for you to be saying, oh, I think you're wrong about this and blah, blah, blah. You're free to, you don't owe anybody an explanation for anything about who you are, what you think. And if there are people who will not respect a polite, hi, I thank you for that, but I'm going to do it a different way, and I'm not interested in discussing it right now, maybe another time. People who can't respect that, they're not your friends. They may be blood relatives, but they're not acting like family. They're not acting like friends, and they're not willing to respect you with the same respect that they want in return. And I think that Genevieve's right to point that out. And I think that you're right to point that out. And I've had long conversations with family members, and not always ones I wanted to be in. And for the most part, I'm still family with all of them and still engaged in conversations with all of them. Yeah, this time of year, your question is one of the most common that we're going to get. And the boundaries are for you. And I'm sorry, I may have missed it, whether or not you have a partner at all, but those are for you to set. And you do it in cooperation with other people. And people who don't want to respect your boundaries probably aren't respecting you either.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thanks to both of you and the rest of the crew. Y'all definitely, especially people in my position, there's a lot of people like me that grew up fundamental Christian. It's a great resource to have, to hear other people's perspectives. And so, yeah, thank y'all from that group of people, the people that have gotten out, and appreciate the advice.
Thanks so much, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on that note, first of all, I want once again to thank the crew behind the scenes who make this show possible every week. Maybe we'll get all 6 or 7. Oh, we have 5 on there now. They all get to wave, no spinning stuff. Huge thank you to Genevieve for agreeing to come in and do this show with me, which is not an easy thing to do on Sunday. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'd love to have you back. But I must say, there's a lot going on. And I talked about potential conventions, and we all know what's going on with regard to, or hopefully we all know what's going on with regard to pandemics and things like that. But the physical facts of the largely deterministic universe have either granted me the free will to end the show in a moment, or it is predetermined that I will end the show in a moment. In either sense, it will be my call as to when the show ends as far as my participation in it. I can't actually control the people in the other room and force them to stop the show as soon as I'm done talking. I can't force them to stop, to not stop the show right now when I'm in mid-sentence. They could do something like that. Maybe I'm rambling just to test them and see if they can actually do it. We don't know, but at the end of the day, as the host of the show, it's been delegated to me the responsibility to decide, hey, the show is going to end, and I don't know whether it's the result of will.
What will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? You think it's any of your business what goes on between my thighs? I wonder when we'll be rid of your lies.
It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.